You're listening to the Tank Magazine podcast, and in this episode, we'll hear about the novelist Tod Wodicka's 168-hour long trip to the exciting, beautiful, and bottomlessly strange northern Michigan. This piece is taken from the Tank travel issue and is read by Brendan Harvey.
Introduction. Why Michigan? If Max Horkheimer were a primordial Midwestern state, he would be Michigan. Oh, radiant Michigan! It is an idea that has always rather excited us. Theodore Adorno in 1938. It's been said that no northern segment of any Midwestern state in the United States of America is more exciting than the northern segment of Michigan that contains Traverse City, the cherry capital of the world. I recently visited in order to receive a whole bunch of complimentary luxury and gourmet items under the pretense of writing this travel piece about how exciting northern Michigan is. Now, northern Michigan actually is exciting, and beautiful and bottomlessly strange. But I didn't know this, or really care, when I booked my ticket from LAX to Cherry Capital Airport. Why Michigan? Why Michigan just so happens to be the state's official motto, found on their license plates and woolen jumpers. Well, I glommed on to northern Michigan for reasons that the official photographer of this piece, hereafter known as the photographer, told me she wouldn't necessarily be uncomfortable with me revealing. But all the same, could I, please, maybe not? The photographer is right to be concerned. The last time I wrote about someone for this publication, I ended up being accosted by that someone's brother, who, apparently unbeknownst to that someone, showed up at my door, which I was too chicken shit to open, in order to make some high-pitched and dubious legal threats concerning the most accurate content of said article. I've decided to tread lightly this time around, which is to say, I did not visit northern Michigan because the photographer is currently pregnant with my child, nor can it be said that I visited the cherry capital of the world and its surrounding environs for any reasons relating to the photographer, or her family, who may or may not hail from the cherry capital of the world and who I barely even know. Believe it or not, northern Michigan was my second choice for my second fake travel article for this magazine. My original idea was to score a free Mediterranean cruise, and then write a kind of loose and tortured European migrant crisis update on David Foster Wallace's classic 1996 essay, Shipping Out, on the nearly lethal comforts of a luxury cruise. This was not to be. Something about the PR folks for cruise ships not wanting the phantoms of dead Syrian children floating bloated on their on-deck pools, or me seeding your affluent minds with images of big families in small boats, being metaphorically or literally capsized in the wake of a rampaging cruise ship, screaming, sinking families having no fun at all, and not unwinding, like me, with free cocktails, live poolside entertainment, and a delicious moral quandary that inspires me to write a sharp, darkly comedic and moving article, while basically floating hither and thither in a giant hotel, under all those historic stars, past dumb white Greek villages, drinking just stupid amounts of complimentary cocktails, and eventually having an affair with a vaguely mathematical and bored middle-aged Danish couple, while out there, way off out there on the horizon, other families die. Total bullshit, obviously. Truth is, like most of you, my heart was never in covering the refugee crisis. I just wanted a hook to my pitch, something to get me on a giant boat where I could ostentatiously fail to absolve myself from all the free, amoral fun I'd be having drinking frozen mango daiquiris and fucking Freya while Magnus watches. Or Magnus while Freya watches. Danes. I was prepared to appropriate the horror of the refugee crisis in order to score a complimentary Mediterranean cruise. And yes, I would again. Meaning, perhaps, I'm no longer such a fake journalist after all. Monday, 11 a.m., the most exciting cherry-themed airport in the world. Cherry Capital Airport is a really great place to start your 168 hours in northern Michigan, especially if you have to get to northern Michigan on an airplane, which I recommend, as long as you're not flying Delta, which would not sponsor this travel article, and, I'm told, are soft on international terrorism. I arrived with the photographer, after having taken a number of mood-altering pills because I'm afraid of flying, and I also like taking mood-altering pills. I remember very little about the flight, which might have been 2 flights, or even a train. This was in July of 2016, I thought I was looking pretty good back then, but I've since seen the photographs and apparently I was starting to gain a little weight, which has now, at the time of writing, become a lot of weight, and this is all because of food. But, people, you're really going to love Cherry Capital Airport. It's carpeted. There are large fiberglass boats parked here and there, and I think you can win these. Or maybe they're there to make you want to buy one. If so, mission accomplished. I now want to buy a fiberglass boat. It's really just a super airport, and it feels like everyone you see there could potentially be waiting for you, especially if you are white like me, because they are all white too. Unironically white. All of them. And so it's almost as if I've come home, right back to the source. And there they all are, in their shorts and teeth and tucked-in polo shirts. They've been waiting for me, the whites of northern Michigan waving me in. Why so shy? Come on already. They're ready to keep me safe, no questions asked. Pick up my luggage, ruffle what's left of my hair. Tell me about cherries and home equity insurance and something zany the dog did. And Todd. Shh. Hey. Todd. We got you, bub. Everything is going to be okay. I'll tell them that I'm 40, that I've just turned 40. They'll say that many of them are 40 as well. In fact, most of them are 40, even the ones that look to be 28, or 13, or 66. Their souls are uniformly utilitarian and middle-aged. They were born 40. So I will tell them, because they're listening, that I've recently moved from Berlin, Germany, to Los Angeles, California, and that this has been positive, mostly because of the photographer and the English language and the delicious food, which has begun to make me a chub-a-lump, but that it's also tearing me apart because I've had to leave my 10-year-old son behind with his German mother, who will not let him get on a plane to visit me in Los Angeles because he's not allowed to die alone in a plane until he's 15 years old. Do not get me fucking started. Well, don't start, they'll say, with toothpaste whiteness. Stop. Todd. Stop. They'll tell me to calm down, to exhale, inhale, exhale. And welcome to Michigan, son. You're going to be so happy here in northern Michigan, they'll say. And you know what? They will be right. Welcome to Traverse City. Proud to be a Coast Guard city, says the sign. It's adorned with insignias of golden wings, under which dandled 3 engorged testicular cherries. By coast, I guess they mean the coast of Lake Michigan. And by guard, I suppose they mean against people in boats from Wisconsin, or the Canadians, who are fucking monsters. Basically, if you're looking for a cherry-themed airport, it's unlikely that you'll do better than Traverse City's Cherry Capital Airport. Traverse City may have invented the contemporary cherry for all I know, or all you need to. Suffice to say, even though there are many cherry-themed stores in Traverse City and all around northern Michigan, and yes, I went to some of them, a lot of them actually, and I tried this awesome spicy cherry salsa from the Cherry Republic store in Glen Arbor, which I now wish I had purchased in bulk and brought back to California. But what I'm trying to say is that you can pretty much do all your important cherry-themed shopping at Cherry Capital Airport. Hot tip. You can also buy some of the other things that Michiganders are obsessed with, like books about minor shipwrecks that happened in the 1970s. 3:35 p.m. New Rural Rustic. Mid to late afternoon on a Sunday is a great time to do one of the best possible things that I can recommend doing when in northern Michigan, which is meeting Sherry and Adair Correll of Pearl Lake. Pearl Lake is an actual lake town near the town of Lake Ann, which is a tiny village founded, apparently, around a lake, or the idea of a lake, named Ann. I never saw Lake Ann. I looked, I asked around. I don't believe that Lake Ann actually exists. And soon it became clear to me that Michiganders are so deeply into lakes, the exciting idea of a lake, especially the idea of lakes existing in Michigan, even in places where lakes don't actually exist in Michigan, that they just go and name anything they want a lake. It's not exactly trickery, it's sweet and rather hopeful. Lake being a prefix or suffix like San, Chester, or Darth. Something that denotes rather than accurately describes. In 2015, Lake was the second most popular female baby name in northern Michigan, right after Olivia, and right before Michigan itself. Yes, Michiganders are also so into Michigan that they name their girl babies after the state. Mark them young. This is similar to how aspirational parents in London and Milwaukee name their kids Brooklyn, or how Germans name theirs Kevin. Anyway, Sherry Correll of Pearl Lake, which is an actual lake, is an actual artist of inscrutable grace. From afar, and for some time now, I've been a fan of her work. This would be my first encounter with the artist and her art up close. I'm not going to comment on whether the photographer had anything to do with this meeting, because why would she? Nor will I admit to having anything other than professional journalistic interest in the Corrells, because it's not like I'm sleeping with their daughter, if they even have a daughter. Frankly, I've got better things to do. Sherry Correll's a pretty good driver, but only when she's not being attacked by invisible insects, which, like Anne, she claims exist, but which, being invisible, I've never seen. Conveniently, these critters are called no-see-ums. They would suddenly feast upon her arms and legs, causing great volcanic swelling and itching that would, in turn, cause the car to hop about on the road like a flea, and nearly crash into things, like people. For much of our stay in northern Michigan, Sherry was to be our guide and chauffeur. She also allowed us to stay at the home she shares with her husband, Adair Correll, a famed folk singer who is, I'm told, afraid of frogs, but totally willing to rip apart hornets' nests with his bare hands in order to protect his wife and their beloved dog, Mackie. He was often busy in the yard. Sherry Correll dresses like a meticulous firework. She is a beautiful woman, her demeanor and attire a shifting buzzing of colors and lightness. I can't really describe for you exactly what she wore, because I can never remember what people wear unless they're naked. But I can still totally see the after effect, like a series of colorful, controlled, neurotic explosions on the back of my closed eyelids. Her work, meanwhile, especially her more recent stuff, couldn't be more different. It can feel as if it's forming right before your eyes, and not from the light but the dark. It is sometimes creepy in that it actually appears to creep, to lift itself up and form out of, say, roadside offerings like tar or metal. And sometimes it is meditative, looking like photographs or paintings of what might happen if yoga melted. It's as if she's creating a new rural Michigan rustic movement, where the rust and discarded torn rubber are literal, as if the detritus from the lower part of the state, Detroit, say, has sent its unemployed matter up into the sprawling northern natural world. Tires become tendrils, become beautiful, menacing trees. So do shovels. Card tables suck wheels and steal to them like magnets, and then stick themselves to the walls of galleries. It was hard to imagine Sherry Correll creating such work, and during my 168 hours in northern Michigan, I began to imagine that Sherry Correll and her art were in league together, like they were both the artist. That the actual art being created was a spectral new space that Sherry Correll and her physical art formed between them, a potent bafflement, a strange, soulful parallel narrative. Was this thing the true thing? Well, this invisible thing joined us on our 168-hour journey through Michigan, the way a good and mysterious novel you're reading can join you on a journey, whispering about a better reality just off to the side. Their home most resembles a kind of elongated wooden seafaring vessel that's been beached on Pearl Lake and long since worked over by a bustling team of arts and crafts maniacs. This is way better than being on an amoral cruise of the Mediterranean. Like a cleverly designed video game, it's hard to get a grasp on just how many levels there are. But I'm immediately comfortable here, more at home than anywhere I've felt in a long time. The smell of summer sun on wood, on tree, on water. I'm offered wine. I take wine. I stand on one of the many wooden balconies, or interconnected treehouse-like connective porches, looking out onto the inhuman, weedy quiet of Pearl Lake, and I really wish that I hadn't quit smoking. I wish I hadn't ever moved to a city, any of the cities I'd ever moved to, because why? Why when there are lakes? I try and get a signal to Skype with my son in Berlin, but Berlin is too stupid and far away, and I try to not think too hard about distance and this endless present moment where he also exists, right now, just not with me. He would love it so much here. Every inch of the wall is covered with art, mostly framed paintings, photographs, and other oddities, and most from artists that Sherry Carell knows personally. During my stay, I will visit a number of northern Michigan art galleries, like Twisted Fish, which had some haunting livestock portraiture, and even an invite-only country clubbish art auction fundraiser thing called DeArt for Art 2016 in the aggressively charming lakeside town of Harbor Springs. That was super fun because of all the free wine and free gourmet food, but mostly the free wine, all I could drink, which sure was a lot and made things like custom pet portraits and everyone's colorful print shirt and blouses feel more conceptual and dizzying than anything at Berlin's Hamburger Bahnhof Gallery. I will see art in breweries, in vodka and whiskey distilleries, and in cherry-themed cafes. And I will learn this, that there are more artists living in northern Michigan, per capita, than any other place in the world. It's more than a hobby, there's something else going on here. Because most of these artists are right now painting or drawing or sculpting the likeness of their surroundings in northern Michigan. It's a project of staggering proportions. The beautiful dunes, the lakes, the shipwrecks from the 1970s, the trees, cows, loons, the dunes, the dunes, the dunes. Sleeping Bear Dunes, every last Michigander will tell you and freaking tell you, are apparently the most highly regarded dunes on Earth. Keep in mind, though, a dune is basically just sand. Northern Michigan itself is a collective artist movement not unlike those Google cars that drive around surreptitiously mapping everything, photographing every last street view on Earth. But here they are doing this with paint, mostly, oil and watercolor. They are doing it together, standing on beaches and in forests and in fields. It is both a permanent record and invocation. So when your academic artist culture collapses, and nobody reads art theory anymore because nobody has the time or money to pretend to read art theory anymore, and the electrical grid has fried and we're all offline and eating bugs and the handicapped for protein, and everyone in the world has to follow Sharia law and wear burqas, even the men, especially French men. And the only you-porn you can watch is you in the mirror, jerking off, weeping, or, if you're lucky, your neighbor's fucking. Anyway, when this all comes to pass, which it will, northern Michigander art will remain perfectly formed, whole, because, like the Wu-Tang Clan, it represents. What does it represent? Belief, plus a whole tribe of white people in genuine sync with their surroundings, justifiably exalting their surroundings. Pagans, basically, rightfully in awe of the magic in nature, going around making iconic representations of their world. Paintings of shifting sand and whatnot. On one hand, and besides Sherry Carell's strange and destabilizing work, it's all so clean it might as well be Canadian. But they're not Canadians, thank fucking God. They are northern Michiganders, and, improbably, most of them are also retired teachers. Nearly everyone I met in northern Michigan seemed to be a retired teacher, which, yes, somehow feels like a very Canadian thing to be. But what I'm trying to say is this. During the coming destruction, I've learned that I want to be here, in northern Michigan, helping out. Maybe learning how to paint some dunes, trees, or a house on a lake I can live safely inside of forever. 5:45 p.m. Saving some room for morel shrooms. A true morel mushroom looks like a mushroom that is tripping on mushrooms. The Carells are passionate about these wacky, sponge brain-looking fungi, and they spend hours in the forests, illegally poaching them from secret spots at secret times of the year that they won't even share with each other. It's both a competition and a solitary meditative communion with other people's backyards and property. I believe that it keeps their marriage strong. They prepare the morels with steak on the grill, but as the photographer told me, the steaks are basically an excuse for the morels. She's correct. I've never had a more delicious food. It was like discovering a kind of meat from a new, awesome-looking animal, like the perfectly prepared flesh of something a child might draw. Cloud curls of fur, caramelized horns, polka dots, and a big smile. Yum! 8 p.m. Sing-along songs about overrated shipwrecks of the 1970s. The best place to hear live original music made by Michiganders about how great it is to be a Michigander is out behind the Lake Ann Brewing Company in Lake Ann, Michigan. The Lake Ann Brewing Company looks a bit like a beefy trailer from the outside, like something that's known hard, dirge-like winters, or had important upper sections of it fly off in storms. Werner Herzog could narrate the lives of the people who call it home. It looks exactly the way you want a bar to look, like a true and tested shelter. The beer is mostly homemade, and delicious. However, Sherry Carell and the photographer have this thing where they want to sample every single beer before deciding on which beer they want to order. Which is at once astute, because really, how do you know? And annoying, because please just order a beer, any beer, so we can all sit down and begin drinking beer, you know? They all taste like beer. On this evening, the back of the Lake Ann Brewing Company opened up into one of the more pleasant beer garden experiences I've ever had. If only because it feels exactly like you're in someone's backyard and not in Germany, with Germans. There are children, old folks, globular pregnancies, and entire picnic tables full of cheerfully wasted ants. Everyone eating and drinking, enjoying the Michigander music of the New Third Coast, a local folk trio, who may or may not all be teachers. A man with a shirt that says, "Rehab is for quitters," stalks the yard like a truck stop court jester, dispensing a drunken joy he alone mistakes for wisdom. People seem to know him. One of the barmaids weaves through the crowd carrying a stack of empty beer glasses at least 18 high, cradling them like you might a dear, recently uprooted sapling. She's a marvel. The New Third Coast play a mixture of favorites by artists like the Eagles and winsome originals that the audience knows just as well. And the evening summer light falls like a peaceful, easy feeling, and Christmas lights pop on a wooden fence. It feels more like a family reunion barbecue than a beer garden. And once again, here comes that welcoming tug at my whiteness. It turns out that the moon is also a white person and has been up there all along. I love the moon. Sherry Carell's husband, Adair, is invited on stage, and the backyard becomes more delicate and hushed, at least at our table. Adair resembles a more wispy, more pensive Jerry Garcia from the Grateful Dead, though the music he plays this night share none of Garcia's cosmic Californian wanderings, but rather feels nourished by the clear, unsalted lake water here, the poetry of true things said well and directly. His songs feel like gifts. I think someone accompanies him on a banjo. Following Adair Carell's triumph, the New Third Coast begins what sounds like an ancient British folk tune. The entire yard becomes both melancholy and purposeful, even the little children, and everyone starts singing creepily along to those opening lines. The legend lives on from the Chippewa on down, of the big lake they called Gitchagummy. The lake, it's said, never gives up her dead when the skies of November turn gloomy. It is Gordon Lightfoot's song, The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald. It is an overly literal and endless song about a shipwreck that didn't, as the faux English tone of the song suggests, happen off the Devon coast in the 16th century. It happened in 1975 in Lake Superior, but it gives a shout out to Michigan, and I guess that's enough. Anyway, people are losing their shit to the most boring shipwreck of all time, looking into their beers, wiping away tears. And I ask the photographer, when is the ship going to sink already? The thing you have to understand about northern Michigan is that it is more like a gentle, good-natured cult than a region. History is stupidly long, and nothing but natural borders ever really hold, and even those, given time, will eventually flood, quake, and collapse into the geological. There's no doubt in my mind that northern Michigan is the sort of place that will eventually be a small, post-collapse nation. Its self-regard is like Texas's, but without the militarism and overt racism and tight, twisted religious buffoonery. Or at least nowhere near as much of that stuff. It'll be a nice place to live during the coming destruction. So 20 or so minutes later, the Edmund Fitzgerald is finally fucking sunk, killing 29 sailors, and thrilling a typically bloodthirsty Canadian named Gordon, of all things, into writing a fake English folk song about it. And so my first evening in Michigan draws to an end. But before that happens, the photographer became defensive about how treacherous the Great Lakes can become. I explained that in no way was I denigrating the treachery of her beloved lakes, or the 29 sailors who lost their lives on it in the 1970s. That it's actually pretty great that 29 dead sailors are still considered a song-worthy tragedy anywhere in this insane world. To which she said, "They may even be a wonder of the world." What? The Great Lakes. Lake Michigan, anyway. She was serious, which is both disturbing and adorable. Lake Michigan is not a wonder of the world. It's not even the biggest of the Great Lakes. But I know enough now not to challenge this. So, to change the subject, I tell the photographer that Saturn's rings aren't actually solid rings, but made of digitally enhanced lies that the so-called scientific community and NASA are using to obscure the truth that global warming is a hoax and Benghazi was an inside job. On the way home, we stop at the Lake Ann Grocery because it is a beautiful structure full of both food and hardware. It's the only store in town, and their motto is, quote, "If we don't have it, then you don't need it." But guess what? They didn't have a bottle of 12-year-old Springbank single malt whiskey, and I assure you, as I assured the medieval woman behind the counter, that I totally needed this. I really did. So they're liars. Tuesday, 6:30 a.m. to 10 p.m. Avoid. Except for being driven by a Lake Michigan sunset that looked like a blazing tornado, there's nothing worth reporting in regards to Tuesday. If you can, avoid Tuesdays while in northern Michigan. Wednesday, 11 a.m. Alcoholism. Do you know that northern Michigan has a wine country? You do now. Did you know that you can take guided tours of this wine country, which is called the Leelanau Peninsula, in a bus, which is called the Funky Bus? You can. The tour company is called the Traverse City Wine and Beer Tours, and I found it on the internet so you can too. I then asked Tank if they might arrange a free wine tour for me and my northern Michigan posse, the photographer and Sherry Carell, and Tank agreed to try, and were successful. So I'd recommend asking Tank or a similar publication if you want a free wine tour with the Traverse City Wine and Beer Tours Company. The biggest problem I face being a fake travel writer is that in order to accept free stuff, like wine, people want to believe that I'm not a fake travel writer. They also want to give me a lot of information about things like grapes and tannins and funky buses and growing seasons that, in order to accept the free stuff, like wine, I have to pretend to write down and nod at meaningfully. This gets old fast. Mostly I doodle and write down facts that are interesting to me at the time and then, after time has passed, are more or less inscrutable. For example, here are the complete notes that I took on the Traverse City Beer and Wine Tour, minus the doodles. Jaws shoes, very rare. Funky bus. Double stuffed Oreos, a lie? Most of us are retired teachers here. Many polka clubs in Michigan. Who wants to pretend to be a 19th century Polish person? Deer hunter film. Pennsylvania? Ohio? Michigan? Find out. Leelanau wine cellars, not actual cellars. Lake Michigan water, Caribbean blue. Electric blue. Beautiful. Why? Sinister Indian casino. Finding Bigfoot. Cherry wine does neither justice. School buzz. Chateau Fontaine Winery, not actually French. Sherry Correll, quote, "This is my favorite cow farm." Meat straw. One could say that I made a typically passive-aggressive point of learning nothing about Michigan wine. And one could say that this is similar to how I refused to learn a word of German while living in Germany for 10 years. But why say that? Why make a fuss? Anyway, the owner of the Traverse City Wine and Beer Tours was a lovely human being, whose name I only pretended to write down. I did note, however, that she was extraordinarily proud of the Funky Bus, which was a new acquisition, or an old acquisition newly painted in a funky-ass manner. I promised to do all I could to put the Funky Bus in Tank magazine. It's all that you imagine it to be, and more. Anyway, within the bouncing mobile joy that is the Funky Bus, we visited a number of wineries, had some wine which was mediocre, and some that was good, and a few that were just wonderful. But all that were 100% free because I was pretending to write a travel article about northern Michigan. Sherry Carell said that she had the best day in recent memory. I did too. I believe that France could learn a lot from the whole Funky Bus experience. I bought a bottle from each of the wine places we visited so that we wouldn't have to stop drinking between stops. The scenery, the glowing blue lake, the roadside greenery, the huddled weeping masses, made a lovely pairing with this wine, which was white. For the most part, northern Michigan red wine should not be consumed, even if they offer it to you for free. Fact. Double stuff Oreo is actually spelled with one F, not two. This is because they don't want to get sued for not actually containing double the stuff found in original Oreo brand cookies. Moral. Make sure and spell check food products before purchase. My favorite stop had nothing to do with wine. It was a place called Northern Latitudes Distillery. There, besides trying a whole array of tasty homemade liquors, we met James, the bartender. James has the drum notation to Led Zeppelin's Stairway to Heaven tattooed on his arm. I believe that this is the only good tattoo I've ever seen on a human being, and I mean that sincerely. He also invented one of his signature drinks, the Squatch, after watching a marathon of the TV show Finding Bigfoot. The Squatch contains maple syrup, which, James learned, is a condiment that the Sasquatch is known to enjoy. I asked James if they ever find a Bigfoot in Finding Bigfoot. Still looking, he said. James made us perfect Bloody Marys, which we drank out of straws made of beef jerky. What does alcohol taste like when sipped through a straw made of meat? Remember the first time you heard Stairway to Heaven stoned out of your mind, and you thought there were druids in the room? It tasted like that. 4 p.m., on a motorcycle, down the dunes, into the waves. You're probably as sick of hearing about me being sick of being told about northern Michigan lakes as I was of being told about northern Michigan lakes. But too bad for you. Because the very best thing I did in northern Michigan was visit that stupid lake. The big one they're all going on about so much. Lake Michigan. I'll keep this brief. I got there on the back of a 2004 650cc Yamaha V-Star Classic motorcycle driven by Adair Corell. The drive took over 30 minutes. I wore a tiny gay bathing suit. Ladies, have you ever ridden on the back of a motorcycle? It was terrifying at first, the goofily blatant sexual submission of it all. I could not stop laughing. I was so afraid and so happy. Death! So near and welcoming and outrageous, and how amazing that the one space that wasn't death was controlled by a folk singer. I held on tight. Then I only kind of held on tight, knowing all the while that if I suddenly jerked anywhere to the left, right, or back, I would be dead. Northern Michigan would meet my body, and northern Michigan would fucking kill me in an orgasm of blathering speed and tumble. My face hurt from smiling when we arrived at Empire Beach. The photographer and I went swimming in the giddy strangeness of a lake with waves, large, crashing freshwater waves. I didn't know such things existed. They felt silken. These are waves that you can drink. I asked about sharks, because I always ask about sharks, but also because anything seemed possible. This, dear reader, is what you should do at 4 p.m. in northern Michigan on a Wednesday. To our left, cliffs of sand. It was like someone made an artisanal sandcastle version of the white cliffs of Dover. Later, we'd go to the top of one of those sand cliffs, called Number 9 Overlook, part of the Pierce Stocking Scenic Drive in the Sleeping Bear Dunes Park, and we'd watch actual human beings jump and roll. Up there, a sign said, "Don't risk injury and rescue fees by going down, or the 2 hours it may take to climb back up." It also said, "Enjoy the view from here." Sherry Carell told me that every few weeks they have to helicopter someone up from the bottom of this sand cliff. It's harder than you think to walk up an almost sheer wall of sand. People get to the bottom, then become dehydrated on their way up and pass out or have heart attacks, or can't believe that they thought it was a good idea to throw themselves down a cliff of sand, and so totally freak out, screaming, waving, seeing things that aren't there like happiness and sharks. I get a hold of my son in Berlin, finally. Excited, I Skype text him how much he would love it here. The freshwater waves and cliffs of sand. He writes back with only a sad-faced emoticon. I should have told him it was terrible. Thursday, 8 p.m. Free food in the basement of a formal mental institution. Germany, as most of you know, has the most ghastly cuisine in the Western world. It's utilitarian and artless and a little bit afraid of itself. German cuisine is a war criminal trying its best to appear normal. So very, very normal. And it's my theory that the same thing that enables the Germanic people to be great at making automobiles and bureaucracy, and sex involving excrement, is what makes them so aggressively unremarkable at food production. I only mention this because I lived in Germany for 10 years, and I had to eat, often daily. I've recently settled in Los Angeles, and the food here has been a revelation. I live in Koreatown, and I've actually gotten used to having galbi and banchan for breakfast at 24-hour Korean barbecues. Moreover, in LA, I've had better food prepared in trucks and out-of-the-way strip malls than I've had in the most trendy Berlin restaurant. I've eaten bowls of crickets, and I've eaten pieces of animals that only the Guangdongese know how to identify. And I am getting fat. And I say this only to highlight the utterly improbable but exciting fact that the very best meal I've had since returning to the United States this year, I had in Traverse City, Michigan, in the basement of an old mental asylum. The restaurant is called Trattoria Stella. Did the photographer and I have to pay for this meal? No, because we are fake journalists, we did not. But we did have to pay for the drinks, and you might be surprised to learn that we drank a lot, like real journalists. First, some perfectly balanced martinis featuring locally distilled spirits, then a perfectly chosen bottle of red wine, which was not locally produced, thank God, and then a couple of their delicious cocktails with needlessly complex origin stories. The photographer ordered a Just Stop Talking. Angostura bitters, organic rye, orgeat syrup, egg white, fresh lemon juice. It didn't work. The tablecloth was not cloth, but butcher paper. Our table was off in the nook of a gentrified subterranean stone tunnel that I wouldn't want to be stuck in alone at night because I believe in ghosts. The free food was Italian, with a focus on the interesting parts of freshly butchered animals, like sweetmeats, tripe, and marrow. The burrata pugliese looked like a leaking albino sea creature and tasted like one of the 2 or 3 greatest cheese things I've ever had in my life. The duck liver pate was nearly as good, as was my squid ink pasta, and whatever part of whatever animal the photographer consumed. I think it could have been cheek. Friday/Saturday/Sunday/eternity. End times on the island of the uncanny valley. In the 1980 film Somewhere in Time, Christopher Reeve plays a writer who manages to time travel back to 1912. He does this not with a DeLorean, wormhole, or TARDIS, but because he is Christopher Reeve, simply by purchasing some vintage clothing and utilizing the power of self-suggestion. The film is romantic in the sense that it makes no sense whatsoever. Christopher Reeve was an actor ahead of his time, specifically his face. His face in Somewhere in Time is a chilling and alien idea of handsome, like someone Snapchat face-swapped Al Gore and Michael Jackson, or like Christopher Reeve is actually a CGI creation being mo-capped from the future by Andy Serkis. He is, in fact, the first instance of a human actor inhabiting the uncanny valley. Wikipedia says that the uncanny valley, in aesthetics, is the hypothesis that human replicas that appear almost, but not exactly like real human beings, elicit feelings of eeriness and revulsion. Think CGI Tom Hanks in that Christmas torture porn film, Polar Express. Anyway, CGI Christopher Reeve inexplicably travels back in time to 1912, to the Grand Hotel on Mackinac Island, northern Michigan, and he falls in love with an actress and moons about to a John Barry score, and some other things happen. But, really, all you can do is watch his face and wonder how they made that face and why. It's eerie and revolting. By the end of the film, there's a scene where Christopher Reeve ends up finding a modern coin in his vintage suit, and that sends him back to the future, where he overacts and dies. The last scene is Christopher Reeve and his 1912 girl in heaven, holding hands. Heaven looks like a commercial for toilet paper. The photographer, after watching Somewhere in Time with me, said, I think that was the worst film I've ever seen. I said, we must go to the Grand Hotel on Mackinac Island. Because the media people at the Grand Hotel were either assholes or smart or totally onto me, it was extremely difficult to get me and the photographer a free stay. The Grand Hotel is super historic and grand and white and on an island where there are no automobiles allowed. The whole Grand Hotel experience is like a reenactment or time travel, if time travel really was as boring as Somewhere in Time makes it seem. You even have to wear a suit or dress in all public spaces after 6:30. So I had to rent one last minute from the nice guys at the captain's quarters in Traverse City. I chose one with a leprechaun green tie and vest. You get to Mackinac Island on a ferry, which passes by the famous 8-mile-long Mackinac Bridge. This bridge can be found on many Michigan license plates. Michiganders are almost as proud of the bridge, the 5th largest suspension bridge in the world, as they are of the sinking of the Edmund Fitzgerald. 29 dead sailors. I think that the Mackinac Bridge is famous because it connects 2 places that nobody really wants to go. In a way, it is beautiful, like a couple in their 80s using a condom. The ferry also passed a lighthouse that looked like it was built to justify having a really picturesque lighthouse. All water seems unreal if you look at it for too long. Disembarking the ferry, we were met with a man holding a sign with my name on it, purposely misspelled to draw attention to what a dick I was being, or about to be. He knew. He took our bags and let us do a horse-drawn carriage. It's hard to take anything seriously when in a horse-drawn carriage, but it is especially hard to take the monstrous wedding cake that is in the Grand Hotel seriously. Nothing can prepare you for the carpeting of the Grand Hotel, nothing, or the moss-green walls, the Kubrickian halls. It is a sad thing that Stanley Kubrick never got to film Christopher Reeve's face, or the sofas and the people sitting on them, taking tea, taking themselves way too seriously. It's like doing DMT, this sudden snap into a new dimension, this onslaught of an alien reality. The photographer spent hours walking around taking photos, and still she never really scratched the surface. Was never able to capture the cumulative buzzing, inhuman field of tastelessness that the Grand Hotel sustains like a laboratory-bred virus or grievance. Really, this was tastelessness as a tangible, almost avant-garde space. It challenges everything you think you know about taste and design, and this, I'm thinking, is probably good in the end. Because don't you feel most alive when you're most aware, like during war or when confronted with Muppet sex toy-shaped sofas, the way that novelty slows time? We felt so slow and alive. Our free room? Same deal. It was a demented grandmotherly horror. Laura Ashley would call this gaudy, the photographer said, as we got dressed up for our evening of free gourmet food. Outside our room's window, supersized American flags, dozens of them, hanging over people taking selfies with horses. I didn't see any boats out on Lake Michigan, which was as still as ice or drying paint. The Grand Hotel left us a free bottle of wine in a wooden box, and other goodies, like fudge, compliments of the Musser family. We never found out who this Musser family was, but I like to think that they were swinger family. Husband, wife, wife's sister, grown son, looking for a little action, leaving us goodies the same way you might buy someone a drink across the room in a movie. Or did these Mussers own the hotel? Because I didn't show up for the scheduled meeting with the Grand Hotel's official historian. I'll never know. Truth is, I couldn't imagine anything so stuck in the uncanny valley to have any kind of relatable history. It'd be like learning the history of an element, like phosphorus. It was probably a trap. Anyway, the leprechaun green of my tie and vest coordinated perfectly with the Grand Hotel green, and the photographer looked just gorgeous in her black dress. The delicate thing I need to point out about the free meal is that it was served almost entirely by a huge staff of black waiters and waitresses. Not everyone, but a large number of them. These were the most black people I'd so far seen in northern Michigan, and all working in this restaurant. I know Michigan wasn't a slave state, but I kind of felt that this was taking the reenactment thing a little too far. 3 things of note happened during the free gourmet dinner. We met the charming master sommelier, Elizabeth Schweitzer, who might be the only 3rd female master sommelier in Michigan, or even the world. I can't read my notes because she got us very drunk on some perfectly chosen wine. 2. The photographer and I got into an argument about which I'm not allowed to write. 3. There was a live band playing, and towards the end they did a song about Michigan, of course, which almost everyone knew and clapped aggressively along with. Then they closed with God Bless America, a song I hate. You're a Grand Old Flag, which made me feel uncomfortable on behalf of the slaves. Following that, the photographer went to go reenact some idea of dancing with the Republicans, and I went out onto the terrace to mope about our argument and look at my phone and drink whiskey. But mostly mope. The lake air felt good. It got late, but it was probably sunrise in Berlin, Germany. I tried to imagine that and lost pops in my chest. I miss it so much, that life. The life of a father getting a little person up and ready for school. Breakfast. I become even more mournful and far away, and then there they are, 2 Danes standing over me. They're both blonde, tall. The wind picks up, smells suddenly of salt. I feel the rumble of engines beneath my feet. Things tremble. We're so bored, they say. Their names are Magnus and Freya. It's very hard to be Scandinavian. Do you know the band Whitesnake, they ask? Yes. Would you like to come back to our room and fuck us while we listen to Whitesnake? I go with them to their room. We listen to Whitesnake's self-titled 1987 album. I fuck Magnus while Freya watches. Then I fuck Freya while Magnus watches. Everyone sighs. Everyone smokes, but not me, because I quit a few weeks ago after I moved to the United States. I promised my son that I would quit because he doesn't want me to die, but then I smoke too. Eventually, David Coverdale of Saltburn by the Sea, North Yorkshire, England, sings his band Whitesnake's #1 hit, Here I Go Again, and the atmosphere in the room changes. Magnus and Freya seem to sing along while finishing each other off, orally, simultaneously. Then we stand at the window, me and my Scando pals, and look out onto the lake, which becomes a sea, then an ocean, and the dark skies start blowing stars around like leaves. There's the sound of something ripping in two, and the Grand Hotel is now cruising through rich, salty waters. We are cruising past the tops of trees and flags and lighthouses, and normal houses sinking beneath the salted waves, and we are cruising past bloated horse carcasses, floating, being ridden by pets named things like Bella and Molly and Max. And we are cruising past the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald, and right over northern Michigan, and I suddenly worry about the photographer, who I love. I hope that she's safe, and I have another tasty free cocktail, something with cherries, and worry about my son and the Corells and Mackie the dog, while out there, way off out there on the horizon, people start to scream and sink.
To hear more podcasts from Tank Magazine, be sure to subscribe through the iTunes Store. The theme music for this podcast is taken from Waiting Games by Kate Simcoe and the London Electronic Orchestra.